Hi, everybody. This is Linda Bubin from Women and Children First Bookstore, and welcome to our event this evening. We begin our virtual events as we begin all our in-store events with a land acknowledgement. Please join me in acknowledging that the land on which the bookstore stands is the occupied, unceded territory of the Potawatomi, Peoria, Miami, and Sioux people. We encourage you to learn more about land acknowledgements and about the rightful owners of the land where this bookstore sits. I'm very excited. This is my first introduction of a virtual event, so be gentle with me, you people out there. But I could not pass up the opportunity to introduce Gish and Margot Livesey, whose books I have loved for the last 20 some years, and who have just been wonderful friends to the bookstore and wonderful supporters. We're here tonight specifically to talk about Margot's book. But I do want to let everybody know that there is a buy the book button at the bottom of your screen. And at any moment when you are moved, as you should be, to buy this book, you can just press that button. Gish Jens has written both fiction and nonfiction, and it's been a while since she's graced us with a work of fiction. And The Resistors, oh my gosh, could not put it down. It's a brilliant book. And Ann Patchett said it was a stone cold masterpiece. I love that language. I think it's absolutely right. And let me just say that I'm not a fan of science fiction or post-apocalyptic novels, and this is set in the future. I'm also not a big baseball lover, and this novel is a lot about baseball. And I loved it. I loved two things that I didn't even know I would love, because Gish is such a great writer, and she creates such a believable setting 50 years or so from now, in which our past, our present is still remembered, but is slipping away. It's a brilliant novel. I just hope y'all read it. And what the two novels have in common, besides being two of my favorite books this year, and two of the books that I could read without being distracted by the news, is that they offer hope. They offer hope in the characters, in their young characters. Margot's book, The Boy in the Field, really is a portrait of a family and a character study of three teenager siblings. And she just captures that time between innocence and experience, and how sometimes we do not go gently into experience, and traumatic things change us and change us forever. It's so tender. The siblings' feelings for each other, for their struggle for morality, to know what's right to do, similar to the struggle of the main character in The Resistors. So both of these novels will not only take you to a beautiful place, and a place where you can explore some of those more tender feelings and remember what it was like when you had your first kiss, and when you had your first traumatic experience that only you and your two siblings know about. It really takes you there. And they're both just wonderful, wonderful reads. I think that's enough for me. But do buy the book. And I believe we're going to make it possible for you to buy the resistors easily here too. All right, now I'm going to turn it over to the two of you.
And Margot, I'm hoping that you will read a little bit to start. I mean, your book is so beautiful, and people should have a chance to hear just how the words fall. Just so elegant and really inspiring.
Thank you so much, Gish. And before I read, I just have to say it is such an honor to have your company here. We have known each other as writers for many years, and I'm not sure we've ever appeared together until suddenly we start doing these Zoom events together.
It's enough to make you celebrate Zoom. That is.
Anyway, it's a delight and an honor to have you here, and thank you for your benediction on my book.
Oh my God. Please read. That we may all hear this brilliant.
I will read. I will do my best to read. I'm going to read from the very opening. So all I need to say is that the novel is set in 1999, and it's set in the countryside outside the city of Oxford in England. Part 1, The Field. Here is what happened one Monday in the month of September in the last year of the last century. Matthew, Zoe, and Duncan Lang were on their way home from school. Usually they took the bus from the larger town where they attended secondary school to the smaller town where they lived. But that morning, their father had said he had an errand to run and would collect them. So they waited beside the school gates and watched the bus depart. After 15 minutes, with no sign of the familiar car, they began to walk along the road that led to their town. They each wore a version of the school uniform, a white shirt, black trousers, and a black pullover. Expecting their father to appear at any moment, they walked fast, making it a game to see how far they could get before he pulled up beside them. They left the last houses behind. Hawthorn hedges and an occasional ash tree hid the fields that bordered the road. Through one gate, they saw a herd of cows. Through another, rows of barley. The afternoon was warm and still. Only a few leaves fringed with brown hinted at autumn. Zoe was the one who spotted something through the hedge. She had a gift for finding things, birds' nests, their mother's calculator, a missing book, a secret. "What's that?" she demanded, stooping to peer through the tangled branches. The flash of red could have been poppies bordering the field, but the poppies had already lost their petals. Before her brothers could answer, she turned and ran back to the gate they had just passed. Matthew and Duncan watched her go. Zoe brought her knees high and pumped her arms. Last sports day, she had won the quarter mile by almost 3 seconds. As she reached the gate, Duncan, without a word, took off after her. A car sped by, the smooth engine noise undercut by a harsh rattle. Matthew looked at the sky, mostly blue with a fortress of cumulus clouds in the east, and gave up on being the responsible one who waited for their father. The 2 bags, his and Zoe's, banged against the metal bars of the gate as he climbed over and jumped down onto the rutted ground. The field had recently been harvested, and circular bales of straw lay randomly across the dull gold stubble. In the middle of the field stood a magnificent oak tree in full leaf. Matthew caught up with first Duncan, then Zoe. From a distance, it was still possible to believe that the boy was asleep, lying on the grassy border between hedge and stubble. "Christ," whispered Zoe. The closer they got to him, the slower they walked. None of them spoke. Glinting bluebottles and smaller flies circled the boy. His hair was dark, his skin very pale. He wore a deep blue shirt, a colour Duncan would later call cobalt, black shorts, and what appeared to be long red socks. At the local private school, the younger boys wore bright red knee socks, and for the briefest instant, Zoe thought, oh, he's in uniform. A few steps closer, and she grasped the nature of the red. His eyelids were pale with a delicate tracery of veins. Everything that happened, they all three later agreed, was only possible because of those closed eyelids. His chest rose fractionally and fell fractionally. With no one to tell them what to feel, they did not cry out or exclaim. Zoe tiptoed forward, knelt down at a cautious distance, and leaned over to touch the boy's bare arm, where it emerged below his shirt sleeve. His skin was reassuringly warm. He was a little older than her, 18, perhaps 19. We need to get help, she said.
That is just fantastic. I have to say that I could listen to you read for the next 20 minutes extremely happily. Anybody can hear, I think, just the gorgeousness of the writing. But we can start maybe with the plot. I wonder if you could say a little bit about how this idea came to you. Did you yourself ever stumble on an injured boy in a field, as it would seem from the brilliance of this description? One would think that you certainly would have had to see this yourself, but I suspect not.
You suspect correctly. I think there were two impulses fueling the boy in the field. One was I became increasingly fed up with the number of bodies of dead women in fiction and the number of novels that begin with the finding of a body and that body being often a young and beautiful woman. So I was interested in trying to subvert that trope, in calling it into question and saying, wait a minute. And that ambition coincided with meeting after many, many years, maybe 40 years, a boy who had been in the adjacent boys' school to the girls' school I attended. This man, Matthew, told me how he had come home one summer afternoon to his house in this small village in Scotland, and just found the body of a young woman at the bottom of his garden. She had very sadly been killed by her boyfriend, and he was maybe in her presence for 15 seconds, but those 15 seconds totally changed his life. They completely derailed his thinking about himself and what he wanted to do, and called everything into question. And he was telling me this 40 years later. So there was a certain elegiac perspective as he described this that really stayed with me.
Oh, of course. And the result is just fantastic, just really, truly fantastic on so many levels. It's so interesting that you talk about subversion, which I think the word subversion came to my mind as a fellow writer about 900 times as I read your book. You're subverting this trope of the woman's body. You're subverting the whodunit. I mean, this book is a whodunit. It has all the suspense of a whodunit. And yet it is so much more than a whodunit. And also, I think that something which I was very struck by was the way that you have so much just unbelievably exquisite, concrete detail in this book. And yet at the same time, you seem to actually, it seems the purpose of all this detail is actually to subvert, and it's all done in words, of course, is to actually subvert what we can know through words. I mean, the very first thing that happens, of course, is this boy utters a word, and a word that, should be very meaningful, but in fact, nobody really hears it correctly. And it seems that, that it's a world in which words seem actually rather useless, ironically. Is there a part of you that really kind of distrusts words and narrative making too, I will say, because also, people are busy spewing out stories which are really quite wrong. I was wondering, whether, this is part of what you were getting at.
Well, I think, yes, I don't distrust words. I have huge trust in words, but I also have many, many questions about words. And I think that I, like my characters, I am perplexed by these two ideas. On the one hand, the idea of truth and how truth is a powerful thing. Truth can set us free. Truth can ennoble us, if you will. But then how do we know the truth? If we're guided by our perceptions and our perceptions are faulty, as Matthew, Zoe, and Duncan all hear a different word when the boy in the field does speak his one word, then what does it mean to try to speak the truth? And then can we speak the truth without hurting other people? And how do you choose between hurting someone and telling the truth? I mean, all these are very vexed questions for me, and I think began long ago in my Scottish childhood when I had a very vehement Sunday school teacher who would stand over us as we shivered in the church pew and thunder away about the truth in this kind of magisterial way.
Well, that's so interesting, because there is this feeling that, you know, whenever anybody utters a fact in this book, it is once true and they completely not the truth, right? You know, from Zoe, when the mother says, "Oh, thank goodness you found him. Who knows what might have happened had you not found him?" And Zoe said, "Well, he would have died. We have 6 or 7 quarts of blood in our bodies, and if we lose 5 or 6 pints, we die." And, you know, but there's, even as she asserts this with great certainty, you do feel that she's at a time in her life when then this is the last time that she's going to be able to say anything with anything like that kind of certainty. I mean, I love how you make what happened to the boy, of course, is a great mystery, but also the 3 young people in your book seem to have fallen through this rabbit hole where 5 minutes ago they were in the world of childhood where they could say these things and they were certain, and they've fallen through into a place where nothing is certain. And nothing is certain, and it's not clear what's knowable. And I wonder if this is also kind of the sort of thing, and I will say also where much that happens is completely dependent on serendipity. Just like in the very first scene, you know, the father has this errand. If the father hadn't had this errand, none of this would have happened. And so everything seems just amazingly precarious. And I was wondering whether this is something that you're thinking about, you know, more generally, or is it just about this time of life? You know, are you asking a larger philosophical question about what's noble and so on? And I couldn't help but think, you probably remember this, the wonderful Alice Munro story. You know, the what is it? The something in the Orange Street skating rink, and I don't remember.
It's in the Moons of Jupiter, I think. It's in a very early book.
Exactly. And do you remember there's the lamp that hangs overhead, kind of hanging, and it's fate, right? It's fate itself kind of casting its light, you know, in quite this arbitrary way. And I couldn't help but see that light in your book when I will say with that great Monrovian wisdom lighting your book as well. But I wonder, what, you know, were you thinking about this kind of serendipity, and have our times made you think even more about that? Because certainly this is a time when I think we do not feel that human agency is quite what it was, maybe.
Well, the novel is set in 1999 when we were all worrying about Y2K and thinking planes would fall from the sky and computers would, I don't know, steal our bank accounts. And none of those terrible things happened, but other terrible things were coming towards us. And so I was writing about a time that there was a slight sense of menace. And of course, I was writing the novel at a time when there was an increasing sense of menace in many countries as right-wing people, right-wing men, I would have to say, came to power. So I think that is definitely part of the novel. And I think that question of what we can know is a very piercing one. And one of the things that we suggest to children and cling to as adults is the idea that we can make decisions, that we can make choices. You know, I will be a writer when I grow up. I will be a rocket scientist. And then as we get older, many of the most important things in our life seem to happen, at least in my case, much more randomly and much more haphazardly. I mean, I would have to say most of the largest things that govern my life, it was not like I sat down and made a choice. That various things came together. And my three characters are grappling with that fact. How can important things be governed by chance? And that's terrifically unfair and very annoying, and yet sometimes a happy thing.
Yes, and of course, it's one of the things that, one of the big ways that you know that you're now an adult is that you were aware that actually, you know, no one is really driving, you know, and here we are in this world. It's not really clear, and anything could happen, as that phrase comes up many times in your book. And yet, for your Duncan and Zoe and Matthew, even as so many of these old guideposts of their life are, you know, falling away, new ones seem to be springing up. And I wonder if you might read the part of the book where Duncan gets a new dog, who proves to be very helpful.
Duncan does get a new dog. Thank you, Gish. I should say that the family has a beloved dog, Arthur, a dachshund. And Arthur very sadly dies a few months before the novel begins. And Duncan, the youngest at 13, just gets fed up coming home to a house that is empty. He needs a companion. He persuades his father to take him to the animal rescue, and that is very complicated because there are so many dogs that he wants to take home, and he doesn't know how to choose between them. And the idea of leaving the other dogs behind is very painful. And this is what happens a few days later. Duncan was leaving the newsagent's, his new pencils paid for and in a bag, when he saw the card in the window. A drawing of a dog, black, with large eyes and large paws, nicely done by someone not particularly skilled. Good dog, free to good home. No phone number, but an address Duncan knew, not far away. He wrote the house number on the palm of his hand. As he walked down first one street, then another, he tried not to be hopeful. Who would get rid of a dog if it didn't have a problem? He wished he could put into words what he was looking for, not size or age or breed, but some kind of emanation. At the sight of the house, Duncan checked his palm, hoping he'd got the number wrong. The front garden was thick with weeds. Moss grew between the bricks around the door. Remembering the drawing, Duncan pushed open the gate. The doorbell, when he pressed it, was dead. He knocked twice. He was bending to move a snail off the path when he heard the latch turn. Two slender feet, clad in black socks, occupied the threshold. "Hey," said a voice. A boy, a little older than Matthew, was regarding him with an open gaze. "Hey." He set the snail down among the reeds. "I saw your notice in the newsagent's about the good dog." Something changed in the boy's expression. Had the dog already gone? "I don't mean to be rude," the boy said, "but is this okay with your mum and dad? Not everyone likes dogs." "It's definitely okay." Duncan explained about Arthur and the failed visit to the animal rescue. "Why don't you want your dog anymore?" he said. "I'm going to London," the boy said. "I can't take care of Lily as well as myself. She needs company, regular walks." Lily, thought Duncan. The boy opened the door wide and led the way down a corridor. In the kitchen, a black dog, a little bigger than Arthur, was sitting on a tattered red rug, her front paws, not especially large, neatly together. Duncan knelt down a couple of yards away and held out his hand. Her coat was sleek, like that of a black Labrador, but her ears were pricked, like those of a corgi, only smaller. She studied him for a few seconds. Then she stood up and walked towards him, taking him in with her dark eyes. She was not a puppy, but still young. She sniffed his hand, sat down, and held up her right paw. The invitation was clear. Duncan felt the rough pads, the prick of nails. Lily emanated. "She likes you," said the boy, "and you seem to like her." "How old is she?" Duncan squeezed her paw gently and released it. "I don't know. She's an orphan. One night last Christmas I came home and she was curled up on the doorstep shivering. She was so small she'd squeezed under the garden gate. I brought her in and fed her, and in the morning I went up and down the street asking if anyone had lost a puppy. I put up notices. No one responded, so I decided she'd claimed me. Now she's claiming you."
It's so wonderful. And I wonder if you want to talk a little bit about Lily and where you got the idea for her, because this is not your typical dog. She has some kind of superpowers. She wanted to just describe her and her unusual abilities.
Lily has wonderful powers of empathy and an almost sort of shamanistic insight into the family. I years ago went to visit a school in New York called the Dalton School. It's a private school, and I visited a number of classes. And the youngest class I visited was 10-year-olds, and they had been reading a couple of my stories, and they were, at first glance, they were rather terrifying. They were all in leather jackets, and they had little combination lock briefcases, and they seemed so sophisticated for 10-year-olds. But when we started talking about my stories, one girl raised her hand and she said, "I just have one question about your stories. I don't understand why the animals don't talk." And I said,
I love that.
"That's a great question. What happens in your stories?" All these 10-year-olds started to be really 10-year-olds. They forgot their combination locks, and they all agreed that, of course, the animals in their stories talked. What was the point of an animal that didn't talk? And I thought that was so cool and so interesting, because if you go into a bookshop and look at children's books, the animals are chatting like mad. Suddenly they shut up. But what if they didn't shut up? What if they didn't have to? So Lily is partly for this girl at the Dalton School. Her name was Megan, I remember, who years and years ago asked this question that has been with me ever since.
Well, it's so interesting because this dog does seem to be able to read people's minds in quite a helpful way, and like I say, for young people who are in a kind of difficult time of life, she's just what they would need. And but of course, Lily is not the only kind of supernatural element in your book. Duncan's mother also kind of appears. I don't know if you want to talk about this, because here we have this what appears to be this perfectly realistic novel in which some distinctly non-realistic things happen.
Yes, I think I'm very interested in a kind of writing that isn't exactly magical realism or fabulism or surrealism, but maybe as a kind of charged realism.
It's so interesting.
Something like that. And Zoe, Duncan's sister, has these moments which she describes as slipping between the teeth of time, when suddenly she is just absent from her body, sort of hovering over things, and then she returns. And she never tells anyone about these moments. And that creates a kind of ambivalence in her. Does she want people to notice that this is happening? And what does it mean if people who love her don't notice that it's happening? It's a disturbing quandary for her. And then there are other moments when slightly surprising things seem to happen.
Yes, we don't want to give them all away, but it's fascinating, especially in a book where, that sets so much, where the writing and the realism is so lavishly done and so beautifully done and seems so concrete and so real. And it's wonderfully daring, I think. And I love this idea of charged realism. And I hope that there are budding writers in the audience who are taking notes right now. I've never heard anybody say, but it's a wonderful phrase. And I do think that this is something that you are doing, which is all your own. And it's quite marvelous. I think that you did do this in your earlier novel, Evil Moves the Furniture. Yes. That's about the mother that you lost when you were so young. And I know that you've talked about how your mother, as you were kind of looking into her life, was herself interested in the supernatural. And I wonder if you yourself are interested in the supernatural, or this is really just a kind of a writing thing.
I wish it were just a writing thing. I will say that when I published Eva Moves the Furniture, which I did on 9/11, so it wasn't for months and months afterwards that I began to give readings from the book. But when I did give readings, almost every reading I gave, someone would come forward to tell me about their past life or to tell me about some encounter they'd had. And I was very sympathetic to these stories and also envious because nothing like that has ever happened to me. My mother had a relationship with the supernatural. In Scotland, we would say she had second sight. And her grandmother had a relationship with the supernatural. So I always hoped that by writing about Eva, I would somehow connect with some of her powers. And I still remain hopeful, but it hasn't happened yet.
Well, I would say that you absolutely have second sight and more than second sight. And I think that and your own interest in vision really comes through this business of looking so closely at something that you see something completely different than one might expect. To the delight of the reader, I will say. You said that you were inspired by the Italian artist, Giorgio Morandi, who was also Duncan's favorite painter, and who paints the same 4 or 5 bottles again and again. You seem to be fascinated by his ability to look and to see more and more. And you seem to suggest that if you look hard enough, we're going to, yes, the reality itself is going to dissolve, and this will be much more mystery than we realize. And of course, one of the mysteries that you seem to be very interested in is the mystery of family. Something that's very much on Duncan's mind, of course, Duncan being adopted, but also your own, as it happens. I did read your wonderful essay that you published not long ago about this really terrific thing that had happened in your life, and I'm wondering whether that's related to Duncan. I wonder if you want to talk about it. And I wonder if that's related to Duncan and his fascination with family, and what family is, because family I will say is another one of the big things that hovers over this book.
Well, Duncan was adopted from the beginning. I mean, when I first had the idea of the novel and the 3 siblings, he was going to be adopted, but I wasn't really sure what purpose that would serve, or if it would just be a kind of accidental thing, like him having darker hair or something. And it was while I was at work on the novel that I discovered, after 40 years of believing I had no relatives, that actually I have a lot of relatives, and they just all happen to be in Australia around Brisbane. And after some back and forth, all this is thanks to Ancestry.com. I would urge everyone to avoid the site unless you want to have your life changed. But
There's serendipity for you.
yeah, but I went there to meet them, and I was so interested. I mean, this sounds solipsistic. I was very interested in my own feelings because I kept thinking, will I feel something different because you're my cousin? Will I feel something different because we share 6% of DNA? Does that make a difference? And I was sort of constantly interrogating myself as I met these people, some of whom I found very sympathetic, some of whom I found less sympathetic, or didn't really connect with. You know, we just talked about kangaroos. You know, I was very interested in that feeling, and I gave some of those feelings to Duncan. I finally thought, oh, now I have an outlet to write about them. I have a way to think about them. And again, I think the nature of family is much more random than I would wish. Some people are happily devoted to people with whom they share a lot of DNA, and other people are not on such good terms despite DNA. So I find that very mysterious. And I myself have a family I adopted, and I'm on very good terms with all 19 members.
So I have to say that of all the things that you said, the thing that most shocks me is the idea that you would have a character in your book who was adopted, and that would just be kind of a random thing that was not part of your plan or a plan, because this book is so gorgeously written and thought through to every last detail. And I think that it is truly, it will be a textbook for writers. I mean, you know, there is so much foreshadowing. There are so many lines which echo in such an important way. You know, when Zoe says, "Well, we're not children." You know, there are like 90 of these, as I don't need to tell you. And so it does seem that you are in control at every second. And so I think the thought that you might have a character in there had no real purpose, I find just mind-blowing. It's completely changed the way that your idea about family is completely changed by Ancestry.com. My idea about you is completely changed by that statement. And I actually don't believe for a minute that you would leave a character in who did not actually have a function. And do you think that that's true? I mean, I could believe that in our first draft, you might have someone like that, but I don't believe that you would leave the character in.
No, you're right. Duncan would have been expelled if he hadn't found his role. But I was going to ask, what about Ondi, for instance, who appears in the opening pages of the registers? I mean, Gish's novel begins with Grant, the narrator, describing his amazing daughter, Gwen, who has a golden arm. She can throw a ball anywhere. And then she has a best friend, Ondi. And, you know, on beginning the book, I didn't pay too much attention to Ondi, but I was wrong.
I came here to interview you, not to be interviewed.
I'll just say a word or two about Resistors.
Well, of course, which is very important, you know, because, you know, I was writing this book that's very much about America and the importance of self-realization. And of course, if you have a very gifted young pitcher, as I had in the character of Gwen, a girl with a golden arm, it's very clear, you know, what America should mean to somebody like that. It's clear that America should allow her to express this great gift, you know. But there is this kind of, there's a flip side to the American dream, which is, well, what if you don't have a great gift? Do you know what I mean? and what does America mean to you then, if anything? You know, and so, you know, so I did have to have kind of just the way that, you know, you were carefully constructing your characters along, you know, a little continuum, and they have different things, you know, and yes, no sooner does the mother say, you know, don't ever go, you know, go off with a stranger again, than, you know, we know that Zoe is about to do just that, you know, but similarly, I also have, you know, things are they're in conversation, in dialogue with each other, and often because there's something that's about my theme which requires another point of view. But that's enough of my. I think I'm here to make you work. But I will say that, you know, one thing you've written about is about, you know, just if we're talking about the craft point of view, of course, like I say, your book is textbook, and I do think that, I mean, not that it's textbook ripping. And I mean, I totally could not put it down. And as I think I wrote to you, I was reading it in a hammock chair, and my light was going. It was the end of the day. I could not leave my chair. By the end, I was absolutely just glued to the page. There was no light left. I'm holding my book like this, but I could not move. I was just transfixed. It's gorgeously done. And then it's clear to me that you also know a few things that, no surprise, having taught for so many years, that you could teach a few people. One of the things that you said is that, you think it's a good thing for characters to hold back a few secrets. I'm wondering if that's a statement that you would stand by, and whether, that involves manipulation of point of view. If I could ask you just one little craft question, I could ask you about 100, but we'll stick to one before we go to the audience questions.
Well, E.M. Forster said in aspects of the novel, I mean, E.M. Forster, the great repressed British novelist, he is a poster boy for repression. He said that, one of the pleasures of the novel was that we could know we readers could know characters better than we could know our family or our friends. Much better, I think he may have said even. And I completely agree with that in many, many ways. But I also think that characters who are truly complex, there are things about them that are hidden, that not everything is explained about a complicated character. I mean, I don't really understand myself in certain ways. Some doors I don't care to open. I think it wouldn't be helpful for my life or my fiction. And I think perhaps I share E.M. Forster's love of repression and reticence a little bit. In thinking that characters should hold something back. And that one of the mysterious things about families is that people are cohabiting, living side by side, sharing meals, and yet everybody is having a different experience of the family, and everybody has things that they are not saying to each other, as well as things they are saying to each other.
Yes, I think what you're trying, maybe I don't mean to put words in your mouth, but it is our experience of the world, yeah. Right? And that although we can theoretically make this omniscient narrator, and we can theoretically know everything, I don't think that we would really like that in fiction, right? Because it's not how we live. It's not how we've experienced it. And what we experience is exactly this, this kind of strangeness, even in intimacy, and also a desire sometimes, a kind of granting to another person their privacy, right? I think that's just part of who we are. It's what makes us human, and we would not want to. To kind of gloss over that. We only have like one more second, and I'm just wondering if you want to talk about what you've been reading recently. If you have any recommendations for the audience.
Well, of course, I'm recommending the Resistors. I'm presently reading Britt Bennett's The Vanishing Half, which I just think is quite wonderful. And just out of reach of my desk, I have a copy of Yi-Yun Lee's new novel.
Oh, I love that.
And Must I Go, which I'm very much looking forward to. And I'm also looking forward to Daniel Evans' new story collection, which I think is coming out this month.
Oh, fantastic. I did also read Yi-Yun Lee's book, as you probably see my blurb on the cover.
Yes.
And oh my God, fantastic! I think I said it's wisdom literature, really. It is fantastic, fantastic.
And you?
Well, I don't think really people want to hear from me, but I'll just say very quickly that I've just finished Maggie Nelson's book, The Argonauts, which is a wonderful book about a gender fluid couple and the family that they create. And as what seems to be would only be appropriate in a book that's about gender fluidity, it's also very genre fluid. And in a fascinating way. And of course, just as a writer, I just so admired somebody who could intersperse so much theory, so much abstruse theory, really, and into a story and never lose momentum. It's quite an impressive piece of wonderful work, which I would greatly recommend to anyone. And on that note, I think that because of the technical issues, I think we agreed that you would go ahead and take audience questions yourself. And so that, so I will just say goodbye.
Okay. I want to ask you questions. Shall I just answer them for you?
No. They're going to ask you questions. Don't ask. I don't have to answer any questions. So you please just look at your questions at the bottom here. See that little button that says "Ask a Question."
I will.
To read them and answer them, and I will simply stand by and listen.
Thank you so much, Gish.
Truly my pleasure.
Alison asks, I imagine you do many readings such as this one when your book is new. And I wonder if you're surprised by some of the questions and if you learn things about your work you weren't aware of by listening to such insightful interviewers as Gish Jen. And if you do, does it make you second guess the choices you made while writing the book, or perhaps give you ideas for the next one? That is a wonderful question. I will say that I hope that questions will not make me want to rewrite my novels. A friend of mine was thrown out of a large London bookshop because she was found altering a passage in her novel. But she realized she felt it didn't work. And I really try not to become that person. But what Gish's wonderful comments and your question does is it holds up a mirror to my work and lets me see what I've put on the page in a different way. And that hopefully does enable me to carry those ideas and go forward to my next project in a good way. That's certainly my hope. So thank you for asking. And my mother and I just reread some of your books, and my mum, who is 90, told me that she'd always heard that Scottish people often have second sight. I have never heard that. Any thoughts? Yes, I do. I have so many thoughts about that. Second sight is very much part of Celtic folklore and tradition. I think you can find ideas about second sight in Scotland and Ireland, and also in Nova Scotia and Cape Breton. And growing up, I always knew that there were people who had second sight, and it took various forms. It was not usually very useful. It wasn't like you could predict the winner of the Kentucky Derby or something like that. But the most notable examples in my own life were, on the one hand, my beloved mother, who died when I was 2.5, Eva of Eva Moves the Furniture. And on the other, my beloved adopted father, who all his life had piercing moments of second sight. And one of the most notable was during the Second World War, when he was fighting in Burma, and they were trying to get out of the jungle, and he had to decide which route to take. And his mother came to him in a dream and told him the path he should take. And they made their way to safety. And he had many other examples of that kind of experience in his life. And it made a huge impression on me, as you can tell, I think, from reading my work.
Is there another question? I see here that there are, at least in the comments, it seems to suggest that there are not more questions. Is that right? Because if not, I have another question.
There's just one more question. Let me answer that. And
yes.
I just ordered the book right now, and I'm looking forward to reading it. In your first reading this evening with the lovely "without someone else to tell them how to feel," it sounds like that phrase captures a theme that will be echoed throughout the book as the children make their way through this difficult time. I'm curious to know at what point that phrase came into the book. Was it in a later draft? Thank you for that very perceptive question. I have to confess that I am not entirely sure, but I think that it came in very much at a later stage. And I think one of the things that interests me about writing about young people is how people have these ideas about young people, about what they're capable of thinking, of feeling, of understanding, of doing. And yet I feel at the moment we're constantly being re-educated, and that people like Gwen in Gish's novel and Greta Thunberg, the teenagers who came forward after the Parkland shootings, that they set us a moral example. And it interests me how children, so-called children, don't necessarily fit with our ideas of young people, that they are capable of great moral courage and complexity of feeling, and maybe many other things we don't expect. I have a friend in London who's 12, and he and I have fantastic conversations about the Labour Party and the future of socialism, and he's much better informed than I am. So thank you for asking. Gish, would you like to ask your question?
I do have another question, and that is, I read someplace, I'm not even really sure where, that you wrote this book as kind of an aesthetic experiment. And that, and that you will sit down and sort of say, well, I haven't written a political novel, and I'm going to write one now, and that this one was your shot at a short novel. And I'm wondering if you've always worked that way. I'm thinking, I've known you for so many years, and how could I not have known this about you? I'm wondering if that's been true all the way along, and I wonder how you decide that that there's a kind of novel that you've never thought to try. And so I just wondered if you could comment on that, because I think many of your readers, understandably, are writers, and I think that this particular part of your process will fascinate them.
I didn't when I first started. I mean, I just thought, oh, I'll write a novel, and then I thought, oh, I'll try to write another novel. But then I gradually began inventing rules for myself. Sometimes they were small rules, like no two characters would use the same swear words, or the novel would take place in a week, say in the case of my novel Criminals. But I think after I wrote Eva Moves the Furniture, I began to think, how can I keep getting better as a writer? How can I keep growing as a writer? And one way was to think formally in the way that I think poets think formally, but perhaps fewer fiction writers do, and to think of setting myself aesthetic challenges. So to write a romance in Banishing Verona, to write my fractured narrative in The House on Fortune Street, to write my homage in The Flight of Gemma Hardy, my homage to Jane Eyre, to write my political novel. And in this case, I really love and admire the work of the great British novelist Penelope Fitzgerald, and I've always admired novels like I think Giovanni's Room, Baldwin's novel, is a wonderful example. These short novels so full of passion and feeling and event, and seeming in no way inferior to longer novels in some magical way. And I really wanted to see if I could write a short novel in which a lot happened, but you maybe wouldn't notice immediately that a lot was happening.
That's so interesting. And I guess two questions. One question is, can you say what you learned, or in what way you improved? I mean, is there something that you learned to do? I said I really don't want to talk about the resistors, but I will say that the fact that I was borrowing from several genres, including the baseball novel, I learned a lot about genre writing doing this, and it was actually really interesting. And I'm wondering whether you similarly, found something out about writing by setting yourself this particular goal, the short novel.
It did make me think very carefully about what kind of detail I needed in a novel as a writer, or I wanted as a reader. how much did I need? How could I get the reader to do her part? How could I show things about, either show or tell in a way that the reader would understand in a few sentences what was at stake. So it made me think in very economical ways that I really, really appreciated trying to do. Who knows? I haven't quite decided on my next aesthetic challenge, but I may go back to being a little, to putting my books on a little less strict diet. They may be allowed dessert as well as main course. We shall see.
I myself, reading your book, I wondered whether, having, push yourself so very hard on the dramatic front, actually kind of pushed you in a more philosophical direction at the same time. Do you know what I mean? Because it did seem like this book was very epistemological, kind of like about the nature of knowledge and big stuff. Yeah. And I actually wondered whether something about the compression kind of moved you in that way that fiction can, in the opposite direction at the same time.
I think that's probably the case, that I was able to smuggle, or I hope I smuggled certain things into the novel that I hadn't been able to get into longer novels.
Yes,
for whatever reason.
It's so interesting. Something where if you had sort of said, well, I'm going to sit down to write this, then you would have probably felt horrified by the long discursive things that came out of that. The nature of knowledge, empiricism, the limits of empiricism, But it's almost like we're in such a dramatic form that these things could naturally arise. And I was very impressed. I thought it was fantastic. And would you want to comment on what comes next?
Well, I think, as you probably know, I'm trying to write a novel that enables me to go to Scotland every day. It will also enable me to do some other things. But at the moment, I would say that its most significant virtue is that I go to my homeland where I cannot presently go. So we shall see. But thank you for asking. And could you tell us what you're working on next?
As you probably know, I actually have just finished a new book, and it is, and as you know very well, Margot, Livesey. I mean, that was kind of a plan since you helped me with it. You know very well that I actually have finished it, and I have a delivery date now of October 1. So I'm busy going through and dotting all my I's and crossing all my T's and taking some of the semicolons out and. All those things which must happen. As you know, it's a collection of linked stories. And I did have to write one last story. I think you have not seen the last story. I did have to write that one last story. I was a little bit nervous about it because, as with all these things, my book was already sold, but I still had to kind of stick my landing, if you will. So I was a very relieved puppy when I felt that I had actually managed to write the story that I needed to write, and that I had stuck my landing. And then after that, I felt like I could breathe, And now comes vacation.
This is wonderful news for everyone. And I think this is a really good note on which to end, and to say thank you to Women and Children First, a bookshop that I've been visiting, it feels like, for 30 years. Is it possible? It's always been so hospitable to me and to so many other writers, and you take such good care of us. And I don't know how it's been for everyone else, but in these times of isolation and distance, reading has been so important to me, and sharing books with people, and having my local bookshops be prepared to let me come and stand on the pavement and get a book has been the brightest part of my week and sometimes my month. So I'm so grateful to you, Linda, and everyone at Women and Children First, and so grateful to everyone who came to listen to Gish and me.
Well, it was a room full of writers.
I noticed some very writerly names.
And I think everybody seems to have been really thrilled with the content. You both are just such a gift. And I tell you, 40 years of Women and Children First and bringing women writers together. And now the way Sarah does the programming to bring writers together in conversation nearly for all of our events. It's really, the sisterhood is really there.
It's really
You're
there.
all helping each other write your books. You're all tuning in to support each other. It's very, very gratifying. And, you know, I feel like I have finally enough books that I want to read. Which when we started the bookstore, it was so hard to find women writers to put on our shelves. And now, you know, there's this beautiful, beautiful, rich abundance. I thank you both for your voices. They have meant so much to me and so many other readers. Remind you all that you can buy the book and that this conversation has been recorded and you'll be able to see it again if you want. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Linda, for this and for all the work over all the years. It's really true. It's an amazing community, and you've done us all just an incredible service. We are so grateful to you.
You know, what you've given me is incomparable.
Kisses to everyone.
Virtual hug to everyone.
Virtual.
Take care and thank you.
You too. I can't wait to read your new book, Gish. That's great.
Soon enough, soon enough.
Good night, everyone.
Good night, good night.